And in this hour, an hour and a half or so, between now and 9 o'clock, I have on the line with me Dr. Barbara R. Blackburn. She is Ph.D. as well. If those of you who listen regularly, you know a couple months ago, Dr. Blackburn and I tried to have our interview and we had equipment failure. It was one of those Houston, we have a problem moments. I could hear Dr. Blackburn. She could not hear me. And so since that time, we have rescheduled and all the equipment is working fine. I'm going to get her introduced. Dr. Barbara Blackburn has dedicated her life to raising the level of rigor and motivation for professional educators and students alike. What differentiates Barbara's 14 books are her easily executable concrete examples based on decades of experience as a teacher, professor, and consultant. Barbara's dedication to education was inspired in her early years by her parents. Her father's doctorate and lifetime career as a professor taught her the importance of professional training. Her mother's career as school secretary shaped Barbara's appreciation of the effort all staff play in the education of every child. I know that's right. Barbara has taught early childhood, elementary, middle, and high school students and has served as an educational consultant for 3 publishing companies. She holds a master's degree in school administration and is certified as a school principal in North Carolina. She received her Ph.D. in curriculum and teaching from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. In 2006, she received the award for Outstanding Junior Professor at Winthrop University. She recently left her position at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte to write and speak full-time. In addition to speaking at state and national conferences, she also regularly presents workshops for teachers and administrators in elementary, middle, and high schools. Her workshops are lively and engaging and filled with practical information, and her most popular topics include rigor is not a 4-letter word, rigorous schools and classrooms leading the way, motivation, engagement, rigor equals student success, instructional strategies that motivate students, content literacy strategies for the young and the restless, motivating yourself and others, and increased support lead to success. We welcome once again, we tried it a couple months ago, to our Reading Circle microphones, none other than Dr. Barbara R. Blackburn. Dr. Blackburn, good morning.
Oh, good morning to you, Mark. Thank you so much.
I tell you, because that morning, I'm on the microphone that morning. Dr. Blackburn, can you hear me? Dr. Blackburn? Barbara, are you there? And she called and hung up and called and hung up. We did that at least 5 to 10 times that morning.
Okay, all kinds of things to make it work, and just nothing would work.
It really would not. Nothing worked is correct. So we got your reschedule, and as divine providence or fate or whatever you want to call it would have it, it happened to be on the same morning that I was interviewing Dr. Payne. So I said, you know what, this is going to be great. We'll do the back-to-back interviews, and we'll just make it Education Sunday. I made sure every educator I know knew about this show this morning. My entire building, every educator I have on my social media sites, I made sure that, look, you got to listen this morning because this is Education Saturday, and something you will hear, I'm sure, will help you in the classroom. So the first hour, we talked about the impacts of poverty on children in the classroom, and one of the things, and I shared this with you the last time we talked, that I'm constantly getting hit with as principal of the school as various stakeholders come into the building, whether it's on the state level or whether it's central office level, they're coming through classrooms saying your work is not rigorous enough for the students. It's not challenging the students enough. And the pushback we constantly have is, for these students, it may not look rigorous to you as you walk in the classroom, but for a child who's in the 5th grade reading on the 1st grade or kindergarten level, even if I give them the cat in the hat, that's rigorous for them. But that's what I want to talk about, because we really, my staff, myself, we really struggled with this notion of rigor. So that's where your book along with Dr. Payne's book are the 2 books that we're doing as book studies this year. So that's why I'm doubly excited that I've had the opportunity to speak with both of you personally. But let's talk about this whole notion of rigor, of what it is and what it is not.
Well, that's actually one of what I think is a huge problem, is that people don't understand what rigor is. They tend to think rigor is more. So if I give double homework, that's rigorous. Or if I give more math problems, that's rigorous. And that's not rigor at all. Because rigor is about depth, It's more about the quality of what you're doing than it is about the quantity of what you're doing. And there's really several aspects of it. Certainly we start with looking at our expectations. What are our expectations for students? And we have always known that high expectations make a difference with students. But sometimes those don't really come into play the way we think they do. For example, we think we have high expectations, but if you really dig down deep into what you're thinking, we have those hidden thoughts like, oh, well, they're from that neighborhood, so they're doing the best they can do.
That's right.
Or, they're a special needs student, so we really can't expect any more than that. Or, she's doing the best she can do. And those statements really reflect lowered expectations. So I'm not saying we can't have different expectations, but we have to be really careful that we don't lower our expectations. Because if you look at some of the research, Robert Marzano in particular has done some work with this. Our expectations actually play out in our actions.
That's correct.
So what he's found is that we behave differently if we have different expectations for students. So, for example, Mark, let's say that I've got Libby in class, who is just a sharp student. She is straight A's. She always does her homework. She is first one to raise her hand. She's also going to ask really good questions in class. I mean, she's just sharp. And then I've got you in class, and you're not quite Libby. You struggle. You're doing good to get half your homework done. You never raise your hand. If I call on you, you put your head down and mumble a little bit because you're worried that you don't have the right answer. You just struggle. You're not a discipline problem, but you struggle. Well, what Marzano found was that I may start the year off with high expectations for both of you. I believe both of you can learn.
Right.
I believe both of you are going to thrive. But what happens is, let's say over that first month of school, if anything, Libby exceeds my expectations. So mine just get higher and higher for her. You, on the other hand, you're struggling, so I don't want to make it too hard for you, so I sort of lower my expectations a little bit. And then I begin to act differently towards you. So in closer proximity to her and give her more eye contact. Because if I stand close to you and give you eye contact, it makes you nervous. So I'll do that with her. I will give her more praise and positive feedback because it's easy to find things with her. You'll get less of that. I'll give her more wait time because if I can wait on her, she'll come up with the answer. But with you, not so much. I will ask her higher order questions. And I'll ask you lower level questions. Now, there's nothing wrong with me starting with a lower level question for you, but with her, I would push her to expand her answer. And with you, I'll let you off the hook. And then with the homework, let's say both of you come in and only did half your homework. With her, I'm really disappointed, and I really encourage her to finish it, and I push her to do that. With you, I'm just grateful you did anything, so I take it. So those expectations play out in actions that we may not even realize we're doing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Because, matter of fact, at the conclusion of the first interview, that's where Dr. Payne got to in terms of, I'm trying to think exactly how she worded it, but it was that same concept. And I know how I worded it with a colleague of mine. She said it one day we were talking, and she said, it's really not in the pity, but in the push. And that is, we tend to, as teachers, as you just said, we will pity the children who are coming from the struggling neighborhoods as opposed to pushing them. Because like you said, well, that's the best they can do. And the crazy thing about it is we don't even realize that that's a low expectation. We think that we're doing something wonderful.
Right.
Because we're pitying them, right. And because we're, being soft with them because of their environment, we think we're doing something good. We think, we're being compassionate, and when really we're hurting them.
Right. And again, it doesn't mean that I can't start where they are. You know, if they're working below grade level, I can start there. But I can't leave them there and write kids off. I think that it's very subtle, and I think it's very subconscious. And
very much so. So now, and whenever we were going to do the interview the last time, we were talking offline before we were to go online, in terms of how do you strike the balance? How do you strike the balance between what is rigorous and what isn't, and then not falling into that pity trap or falling into the triangle that we were just talking about in terms of, well, you know, this is the best that they can do and so forth. Because I hear that a lot. You know what, Mr. Medley, this is, you know, this is about all they can do. I think it depends on how you engage it, because when I go into the classroom, I'm very lively, I'm energetic, I'm passionate. I go in there with the intent of having fun while at the same time, and the kids pick up on that. So there are some things I can get the kids to do that their teachers don't get them to do, and I sometimes kind of wonder, why don't you think like this? Why aren't you thinking the way that I'm thinking to engage the kids in the manner that you see me model for you, that they respond to? How do you strike the balance as to, because again, when I have state folks and central office folks walk in the building and they say, you're still teaching that and this is December?
Right. Of rigor, which is that each student has to be supported so they can succeed. See, if we just have high expectations and expect them to get there, you know, learning by osmosis has never worked. So, you know, that's not going to happen.
Right.
And what we have to remember is the higher the level of rigor, the higher the level of support that is needed. So, for example, think back to your first year as a teacher. That was a challenging year for you, probably. Did you need any help that year?
Absolutely.
Well, that was rigorous, and you needed support. Students are the same way. When we are increasing the level of what they're expected to do, we have to increase the level of support. And that can come in a variety of ways. For example, a huge piece that is important for students is actually model our thinking. So it's things like, you know, when I get to a word in the story that I don't understand, the first thing I do is look at the words around it to see if I can figure it out. That kind of modeling their thinking. We do more of that at the primary grades. I think the older they get, we just sort of think, well, they don't really need it anymore. But the truth is they do.
Right.
So modeling our thinking is just something that ought to be a given. But also in terms of modeling, we need to model with samples of what we expect them to do.
Correct.
So whether I'm expecting them to write a sentence or write a narrative essay, I need to actually show them some samples, and we need to talk about what good looks like. For example, I was working with a group of sixth grade teachers a few and they had a real challenge with students answering extended response questions. So they wanted, you know, a paragraph or two, and the students were not doing well with that at all. It was a school that was 100% Title I, so 100% poverty, and they were really struggling with it. And so what we came up with was a process, and they started by teaching and going through the whole process. Students came in. The teacher talked about that one of the expectations this year was that they write these longer answers. And she wanted to know from the students what looks for to get well, and those are typical responses. Length is the number one students come up with. And then the teachers each talked to the class about, okay, let's really talk about it. Yes, it's important that you're neat and that you spell correctly. But what we're really looking at is quality, which is not necessarily length. Now, you've definitely got to write more than a sentence or two, but what we're looking at is, did you have a good beginning? Did you have a good conclusion?
Correct.
Did you make your point? Did you provide supporting evidence? So the language arts teacher would actually work through that process with them, then would show a sample of a response and ask the kids what grade they would assign, why, then she or he would talk through what they would do. Then, and this would be over several days, then the students were given another sample paper, and they had to work in pairs to assess it. And then by the end of the week, students were writing their own answers, bringing them in for peer review. So they worked through, over the course of a week, a process of beginning to teach them what it was. Well, then the next week, in their science classrooms, the science teachers did the same thing, only a shortened version. You know, you may remember that we're going to be writing extended responses this year in our school. And so then they worked through the process. The next year it was social studies teachers the next week. And then they went for related arts. And then the last week it was math, because extended response in math looks a little bit different. It tends to be explain your answers. And so what happened was the kids were like, oh, my gosh, are y'all talking to each other? You know, what's going on? And they began to realize that, one, this was a standard expectation. And two, they began to write better answers because everybody was on the same page and they actually knew what to look for. And so that kind of modeling is really important, and we underestimate that.
Now, talk a little bit about from the teacher perspective. I know they're going to hate this for all the teachers who are listening, but talk a little bit about how does planning play into that? Because that takes planning. And a lot of times we'll have teachers say either I don't have time to plan, or either, you know, you get a preparatory period, or I don't have time at home, or you've put so much on us that we don't have a chance to think in terms of like that. What do you say to the teacher that says that?
Well, one, you're never going to have enough time to do everything that needs to be done. Teaching is hard work. There's never enough hours in the day. It's a hard balance to make sure you're taking care of family along with work, and you need to find that balance. So, I don't want a teacher working 8 hours at home after they've already worked 10 hours school day. What I do think is it's a matter of working smarter, not harder. So, for example, with this school that I was working with, no one teacher was individually planning that. We worked together to develop the plan it was a professional learning day, so they had some blocks of time. I was working with teachers for about an hour at a time. So we developed the plan then. Teachers in subject areas worked together to find some work samples. Some of them had saved some from the year before, so they used the same one with everybody, so everybody wasn't having to come up with their own. And then they just had to, chunk the time in the classroom, which is also an issue. But what they found was that by taking the time to teach this, they brought back time later in the year when they were still dealing with it.
Absolutely.
So they didn't do that anymore.
Absolutely.
So, you do have to find the planning, but I think the more you can work with other teachers, the better off you are. And I think a real disservice we do is that we stay very isolated and with other teachers. And really, that's the best way to do it with anything. If I need to, let's say I need to create new lesson plans because we've got a new social studies textbook. Well, instead of me creating all the plans, if there's 4 of us, let's split it up. Let's each take a unit or a chapter, each create it, then come together and meet and talk about it. And certainly we've got the flexibility to adapt if we want to, but I'm not having to create everything from scratch.
Right.
And we don't do enough of that, Mark. We just don't.
And you're absolutely right, because all the research has shown that. I'm reading a book by Michael Fullen right now in terms of the principalship, and he says the same thing in terms of having the teachers work together as teams, whether it's grade level teams or subject matter teams or what have you, to do exactly what you just said. And we don't do that. We're still trying to come from under the silo approach. I close my door and I do what I want to do. And that's why sometimes, in my particular building, we do get hit with, well, what are they doing?
Right. And they don't get to see each other teach, so they don't get good new ideas. There's a lot of problems with that. Now, I want to go back to the concept of support, because I have a couple of other strategies that I really want to share. One is chunking, just chunking information. And, you've probably got listeners going, well, I chunk information. But Yeah, that's another thing we do really, really well.
Right.
At the primary grades. But the older they get, we sort of feel like, why do I need to chunk information? They're old enough, they should be able to handle more. And chunking is as simple as taking something big and cutting it down and doing it in small chunks. It's nothing complicated. And I actually had a teacher say to me a few weeks ago, you know what, I'm trying to teach my kids to be responsible, and they need to learn. I'm not going to stop and break this into small pieces for them.
Now, how do you how does the chunking, because a lot of times we've had the discussion of chunking and scaffolding, and the teacher will come back and say, well, when you walked in, I was in the first part of the chunking, so that's why it wouldn't appear rigorous. Can you have both? Can you have chunking and rigor?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. The point is, if I'm seeing something that's not rigorous right now, show me what you're building to. Show me that the later chunks are rigorous. So you can it's like lower level questions. Everybody says, oh, you've always got to be asking higher level questions. No, there's an appropriate time for lower level questions, as long as you're following it up with higher level questions. So when I walk in and I'm in a classroom for 10 minutes and it doesn't look rigorous, I'm going to ask that teacher, show me what you would be doing next. Show me how that was building to something more rigorous. So it's not the isolated piece. It's how does it fit into the overall picture.
That's an interesting point, and I'll tell you why. Because one of our school improvement goals this year is to get more higher order thinking questions. We have 4 goals. We have a language arts goal, we have a math goal, we have a climate and culture goal, and the 4th goal in terms of instruction is higher order thinking questions. And that's an interesting point you just made, that my teachers will probably hug you like crazy in terms of, yes, as long as you're moving towards the higher order thinking questions. And see, it gets difficult because
now the challenge is that too often we spend too much time on the lower level.
Right. That's exactly right. And so, but you gave me an interesting question to ask just now whenever you said, all right, show me where it's moving towards, because that is the limit. No, I'm at the lower level because I'm trying to build it up. I am scaffolding. I am chunking. The time that you walked in for the 10-minute or the 20-minute observation, that's whenever I was at the lower level. So that for all of it, it's just that we're constantly pressured because of our low test scores, if you will, to get there quickly. And there really is no quick fix and no magic bullet, but those beyond us really are pushing us toward that. And so one of the reasons that I chose your book to do the study on this year in terms of is to help us really identify and understand what rigor is all about. So as we talk about that, I know in your book you have a lot of different tools you can use, such as Bloom's taxonomy and all the rest of them. Bloom's we know best, but there were some others you put in the book as well that the teachers can use to foster higher order thinking. Talk a little bit about those various models.
All right, before we do that, I'm going to mess with your radio show. Give one more specific scaffolding activity that teachers may not know about, but it really works with what you're talking about walking in and seeing something that's lower level. And it's a specific reading strategy. And here's what happens. Let's say I'm teaching 4th grade, and I need them to read a 4th grade article about volcanoes.
Right.
And I've got 12 students who can't read it. So I find them something to read that's down on their level. So I find a little 2nd grade piece about volcanoes.
Right.
And if you walk in and you go, well, you're not teaching rigor, you're teaching something lower level. And if we stop there, you're right. But the strategy that I prefer is called layering. Layer bricks to make a wall.
Exactly.
Layer meaning. And at layering meaning, you do exactly that. You take them down to the easier article. But once they've read it, you bring them back to the grade level article, and with your support, they read the grade level article. And because they've read the easier article first, they've built background knowledge, and they've built vocabulary. And because of that, they're better able to be successful with the grade level piece. So with that strategy, I'm balancing meeting them where they are, but then pushing them back up for the increased rigor. And what happens is we don't do that second piece of it. So, that would be a piece where if you came in and they were reading the easier text and you said, this isn't rigorous, I could show you. That's right, because here's where I'm starting with them to build background and vocabulary. But tomorrow, they're working with me in a small group to read the on-grade level piece. See, that's an entirely different situation than just, I'm giving them something to read that they can read.
Now, that makes perfect sense to me. And if a teacher were to tell me that, they would not be in any type of observational trouble whatsoever, because that makes sense to me. Matter of fact, I'm going to share that with them Monday in terms of, because I have a staff meeting Monday at the 3 o'clock hour, and that strategy that you just said, I'm going to share with them in terms of read the same content just at the lower level and then move to the grade level. Same thing. Many of our children, a lot of the readings that we do have not had those experiences. So whenever they're now reading a story that they have absolutely no experience, it's not making a lot of sense to them. So that strategy that you just gave makes a whole lot of sense, because it serves a multi-purpose. They do more than one thing.
Right.
Right.
So let me give you a couple of sources with that. Newsela, which is Newsela, and you can Google them to find them, has been around the longest. They pick a news article of the day, and they provide it at varied levels. So the other thing is you can use this to push your higher achieving students. You can give them something that's even more challenging. So it really does work both ways. But Newsela has been around the longest. Another one I really like is Tween Tribune. So it's like between, tween, Tribune. I really like it because it's produced by the Smithsonian. So the quality of what's in there is, just top of the line. And I don't mean that Newsela isn't.
Right.
I really like what the Smithsonian puts out. They also provide some quizzes, which are moderately rigorous. You could beat them up a little bit, but they've got some quizzes with it. And they let you set up a virtual classroom all for free. And Newsela is free, but if you try to do the virtual classroom, you have to pay for it. And so I really like Tween Tribune for that. But my favorite site is a site called Rewordify, Rewordify. And I think it's just rewordify.com, but again, you could Google it. What it does is you can cut and paste text into the block, and it will simplify it for you.
Wow.
So you can take any text. And, to me, that's just a fabulous tool. It's particularly helpful with second language learners and special needs students, but it's perfect for the strategy of layering meaning. And so layering meaning doesn't work with kindergarten because, how much lower can you go in text with them? But certainly grades 4 and up, the layering meaning strategy is just exceptionally strong.
Wow. And those are strategies that certainly it's easy to implement immediately, because all of us, particularly in the schools, and we just had this conversation in the first hour in terms of, we make the assumption that every child has a computer in the home. But certainly in our schools, or at least in my school, we have enough computers that we can go to in the classroom or in the computer lab to work these sites that you're recommending and suggesting. So I need to change over. We're going to do that. If you've just joined us, my guest is Dr. Barbara R. Blackburn, and we are talking rigor in the classroom. Get on all of your social media sites and let them know that Dr. Blackburn is on the air with me right now.
WPSC-FM 88.7, Wayne, New Jersey.
Part of the William Patterson Broadcast Network. Brave New Radio.
Brave New Radio. Give us your tired, your poor, your hungry, your rockers, your punks, your freaks, your geeks, your Greeks, your party animals, your gangsters, your commuters, your residents, your students, your alums, your lawyers, your truckers, your calls, your tweets. And we'll give you rock, classic, indie, punk, alternative, easy, hard, raps, rhymes, mixes, and drops. We'll give you kick-ass music because we're WPSC 88.7 FM, Brave New Radio. Sound good?
Straight from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center, here's your local forecast.
Well, 32 as a low, mainly sunny skies tomorrow, partly cloudy Sunday night. And then on Monday, 54 as a high, 32 as a low. A few passing clouds during the day and some cloudy skies on Monday evening. Tuesday, sunshine and clouds, a little bit lower temps with 48 as a high, 31 as a low, partly cloudy Tuesday night. And then on Wednesday, 49 as a high, 36 as a low. Intervals of clouds and sunshine during the day, 40% chance of rain during the evening. Cloudy skies again on Wednesday night. That is the weather brought to you right here from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center. Well, we're in the 8 o'clock hour now in an extended version of the Reading Circle with Marc Medley. My guest is Dr. Barbara Blackburn, and we are talking about rigor in the classroom. And the reason that is such a challenge, particularly in an urban environment or an impoverished environment, or either an environment where achievement, academic achievement has not been shown over a number of years, the question really does become, well, how do we define rigor? Because for a child who's in the 6th or 7th grade who is reading on the 2nd or 3rd grade level, in many instances, we'll walk in and the teacher has assigned something on the 2nd grade level for a 7th grader. So from the natural eye as you walk in, we're looking like, that's not rigorous. So that's what we're talking about, and this is an extremely important topic for me because I struggle with trying to figure it out myself. And I know the staff members that work with us, or the team members at my school, we sometimes maybe 5 will do.
Right. And what I'd rather have is 5 where they not only have to work out the problems, but they have to explain their work. Because in math particularly, it's one thing to show your work. It's another one to be able to explain how you solved it. That immediately steps up the rigor because they do have to get into the thinking behind the numbers. And I'd rather have 5 where they have to explain their thinking than 25. And I'll have teachers who say to me, but I really need to give them like 15 problems. That's fine. Choose 4 of them where they have to explain their answer. So you're not having to grade 15 like that, but you are pushing them to explain their answer. Because any time you push a student to explain or justify, you're kicking up the rigor. And again, let's go back to the low expectation student versus the high expectation student. That's a lot of times what we don't do with the low expectation student. With our student who's thriving, they'll give us a one-word answer, and we'll say, okay, explain that a little bit more. Give me some more details. Tell me why. But with our student who's struggling, again, we're just happy they gave us the one-word answer, so we take it and move on. And instead what we need to do is ask them the same question. Why did you come up with that answer? Well, they go, I don't know. Okay, what we're going to do is I want everybody to get with a partner, or everybody to get in small groups of 3. And I want you to talk about Kaylee's answer. She said this. I want everybody in your groups to talk about why that would be the right answer. Well, Kaylee's also talking in her group. And I can come over there and listen. And if they're on the right track, I'm in good shape. If they're not, I can give them a little bit of guidance. So then we're going to break out of the groups, and I'm going to come back to Kaylee. I'm not going to move on and say, okay, Kaylee, explain your answer a little bit more. So what I'm doing is I'm holding her to those high expectations, but I'm providing her the support to get there. And that's, again, the piece that we lose when we talk about rigor. It's just, we're supposed to have higher expectations. Well, absolutely. But you got to help them get there.
Now, I get that. Earlier about when I go into the classroom, I model for the teachers kind of that, exactly what you just described. I get it. As the principal, and having been trained and so forth, it makes a whole lot of sense to me, and I look for it. But I don't see it a lot from the teachers because teaching in general I think teachers feel as if they have to do most of the talking, and they're very uncomfortable with now throwing something out to have the students do most of the talking. We call it the heavy lifting. One of the things we're coaching our teachers is try to have the students do more of the heavy lifting. Don't be afraid to let them struggle and figure things out. But I think as teachers, we want them to get the correct answer so badly that we give hints and we give them the answer. Either we have very short wait time for them to come to an answer. What type of strategies do you have to talk about in terms of helping teachers overcome that need to always be doing all of the talking?
Well, the other thing we do is we'll ask a question, and if they're not quick to answer it, we'll answer it for them.
Correct.
So that's the other thing we do. And I actually think some of that is we're uncomfortable with them not feeling successful. But the other piece that I think plays into that is that we feel under a lot of time pressure. We have so much to cover and so little time, I can't really afford to stop and spend this time. A teacher's best friend is pair share. Getting students with a partner to turn and talk, because it gives them the opportunity to process and to think about things. And I'm not saying they have to talk for 10 minutes. I mean, it can be 1 minute. It can be 2 minutes. But giving them that opportunity. Sometimes what we're doing when we're calling on students, and this analogy is going to sound a little funny when I first explain it, but we're asking students to perform before they practice. So, for example, if I just called on one of your teachers and said, stand up and sing the Star-Spangled Banner right now, they would probably be really nervous, and they might not do their best job.
Right.
Not unless they happen to be in a choir. It would really throw some of them. Well, that's what we do with students when we're talking and we're reading, and then we ask them a question. Well, they haven't had any time to think about it. They haven't had any time to practice. So what happens is, if I can ask a question and have them talk with a partner, then they're getting a chance to come up with their thoughts, practice it on one person before I'm asking them to share it out. And if my groups are struggling, I can say, okay, now, what we're really looking for is why Clifford the Big Red Dog did this. So let's go back in the story, and here's where we talked about it. Now, I want you to talk to your partner and come up with that answer. So I'm not going to tell them again. I'm just going to guide them to where we had talked about it, so they're coming up with the answer. And so using those strategies, then I can get them to come up with something that they can share out in front of the whole group. Now, the other thing I can do is this. Let's go back to you're my struggling student. And I've called on you, and you've given me that deer in the headlights look, and you haven't come up with an answer at all.
Right.
So I've put everybody in groups of 3. So you're talking to your group. But part of the issue you've got is you're not real confident because you never feel like you get the right answer. And so sometimes you have it, but you don't want to share it because you're worried about it. So what I do is, again, as I'm monitoring the classroom, I come over to your group, and I make sure you're on the right page. And if you're not, I give you a little extra guidance. But what I do is I make sure I hear that your group has the correct answer. So your group has come up with the correct answer. And I look at you and say, now, Mark, I need to call on somebody who can answer this question. And I need them to be right so that I don't look bad. And your group has just come up with the right answer. So if I call on you, can you share that right answer with the group? Well, of course they're going to say yes.
Right.
Because I've guaranteed success. And so little strategies that don't take a lot of time can make a big difference. And that one's really simple, to sort of preload who's going to do your answers and to purposely pick some students you don't normally call on. But a lot of times students are afraid they're going to be wrong.
Right. And see, in terms of, this is where I try to, again, from a coaching perspective with my team members, even if the child does give you a wrong answer, push back and challenge them on the thought process of how they got there. And that's what you were talking about, again, about explaining and discussing. Like, okay, help me understand how you got to, talk to me, explain to me your thinking when you got to that answer. And a lot of, again, and it might be because of the time thing, because we, in all honesty, our teachers are overloaded. with all the various initiatives and the time pressure, as well as trying to get them to achieve on these various standardized tests, I know they are overwhelmed. But at the same time, if they would put some of these practices that we're talking about into place, they would get the results that we're looking for. Because I've seen it happen when I walk into a classroom and I do it. Exactly what you just described. I've done so same. I walked into a class the other day. The teacher was round robin reading. and out into groups. They were already segmented into groups, but there was one child reading to the entire class of the groups at a time. I said, stop. Have the children within their group, because they were in pods of 4. Let them take turns within their 4 reading with each other. And then after a certain amount of time, or when they get to the end of the story, we will have them share out randomly. I balled up 4 pieces of paper, put group numbers on them, and let the teacher pick the group. All right, whichever group we pick out of the hat, that's the group that's going to have to talk first. All right, so within your group, now the other groups, you can chime in if you want, but this group is leading. We went through that. The kids had such a good time, and they were bringing up stuff we hadn't even thought about in the story. Right. But the point is, I had to go in there and do that. It's like no matter how many times we tell it, they still fall back on the old tried and true. And I guess that's one of the questions as we try to push toward rigor, is how do you get them to move away from the old tried and true methods of, say, round robin reading or some of the other things that are kind of like archaic in teaching that may have worked when we were kids, but for a child that has the attention span that they have right now of a gnat, doesn't work?
Well, it's funny that you use round robin reading as your example, and that it worked when we were kids. Let me tell you, Mark, the research has been very clear that round robin reading doesn't work. So your teacher's going to hate me if she's listening or he's listening.
That's okay, because I told them the same thing. So go ahead. It's not the first time they've heard it.
Well, I had somebody one time who said, "Well, that must be recent research." The research that shows that round robin reading doesn't work was done in the 1920s. Okay, we've known for a very long time round robin reading doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work for a couple of reasons. You've only got one who's actually reading.
Right.
They're performing without practicing, and what happens is they read it, and you ask them a comprehension question, even if it's a basic "what color was the dog" question, they can't answer it because they were so busy trying to sound good.
Correct.
They weren't actually comprehending anything of what they read. So we know that we're much better off with choral reading or having them read it silently and then having them do some out loud reading, using reading guides that actually guide them through the reading. There's so many other ways to do that may take a little more time but are definitely more effective. Now, how do you get folks to move? I think that's a real challenge, and it comes down to, in many ways, the leadership, not just the leadership from the principal, but from teacher leaders. You've got to be willing to say, we need to change, and here's why.
Right.
So that teachers understand the value of what they're being asked to do. Because when you say, you need to not do this, it goes through a filter with teachers of, are you telling me I'm a bad teacher? And any time you give a recommendation, it goes through that filter. Because if you're telling me to do something different, you're telling me I'm a bad teacher.
Right.
So we have to go with, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that what you're doing is a good start. But can we enhance what you're doing to make it even better? And here's a couple of reasons why. Our test scores, are not as good as they need to be. Are you really seeing the potential in students that you want? For example, are all of your students growing as much as you would like them to be? More than test scores, do you see the growth? And so really getting at the value with teachers, helping them see that value. And then the other thing is helping them feel successful. One of the reasons that teachers do more teacher talk and ultimately retain more control is we feel like we can be successful with that.
Correct.
And what happens if it looks chaotic and my principal comes in and marks me down for not having good classroom management? So there's got to be a real clear understanding that you're there to help them be successful no matter what that takes. and it can be reassuring them about classroom management. In one case I worked with in a middle school, they had hired somebody who was hired under emergency certification in their state.
Yes.
And so he had been a plant manager. And then all of a sudden he's teaching middle school social studies. And he found that, managing little ones, meaning seventh graders, was different than managing adults. And I had recommended a game where you put students in small groups and they're creating their own questions with some guidance. And they were supposed to. The principal said everybody has to try one activity. So he was like, well, I guess I'm going to do this one because I have to do something. And he said, but I don't think it's going to work. The kids are going to go crazy. I'm really worried about how am I going to put them in 6 groups and manage that. Well, what the principal did, because he recognized that it wasn't just whining to get out of it. It was a real concern. The principal enlisted the help of the curriculum specialist for the school, the assistant principal, and they got 2 parent volunteers. And what they did was they set up what day he wanted to play this questioning game for review, and those people came in and were there to help him manage the group. Now, what happened was that as the day went on, he needed less help. And so after lunch, the 2 parent volunteers were able to go home.
Right.
And when the day was over, he told the curriculum specialist, I can do this next time without help. So what happened was they ensured he felt successful. In another case, in an elementary school, I had given them a graphic organizer to use with math word problems. That's very effective. And they really liked it and felt like it would be great with their kids. And they said, but we can't use it. And I said, what's the problem? And they said, we have a paper allotment, and we don't have enough money to run it all. And if we have the kids drawing it, it's going to take them a half hour to draw it. Well, you know what I did, Mark. I went straight to the principal and said, look, here's the deal. Here's the problem. How are you going to fix it? And he said, I'll run it out of my paper allotment. It's no issue. So, sometimes what keeps us from change is a fear of failure. And I really believe the number one job of leaders is to remove barriers for success.
Absolutely.
Simple things like that can make a difference. Sometimes you've just got to encourage them. I also do a lot more asking than telling.
Right.
So if I do walk into a classroom where, let's say a teacher's using true-false tests, okay, which are not rigorous at all because
right.
There's TF and this funky little letter they hope that give them the benefit of the doubt on. If I talk to a teacher who's using true-false, and I'll say, well, how is it working? Well, my students do okay with it, and it's really easy to grade. Well, let me ask you this. Do you really know if they understand it or not?
Right.
Well, I think so. Well, how do you know? How do you know they're not guessing? Well, I guess maybe I don't.
Absolutely.
Way to make an adjustment so you could still use your true-false test, but make an adjustment so you could really know if they understand it. And it takes you a little more time to grade, but not too much. Would you be okay with that? And they typically will go, yeah, okay, I guess I'm willing to try. I say, here's what you do. Still do true-false, but instead of just taking the trues and falses, if it's false, they have to rewrite it as true so that you can really see if they understand it. Does that? Okay. So what's happening is I'm not coming in telling them that what they're doing is bad.
Right.
I'm coming in saying, can we make it better? Now, Mark, the reality is a true-false test is not the best test to give for the most part.
Right.
But if that's what you want to do, then I'm not going to tell you no. I'm just going to help you make it more rigorous. And I think when it comes to change, we have to do that. It's not throw out everything you're doing, you're a bad teacher.
Correct.
It's you're doing some good things. My guess is if I came in and did a training with your school, by the end of the day, the teachers would feel a couple of ways. One thing they would go is, boy, we understand rigor better than we thought we did. 2, some rigor. And 3, there's a lot of ways I could do it better.
That's right.
Because every group I train comes out with that.
If you've just joined us, my guest this morning, my esteemed guest, is Dr. Barbara R. Blackburn, and we're talking rigor in the classroom and how we can obtain it, how we can work towards it, how we can define it, and what rigor is and what rigor is not. I'm going to share some information with you, but listening audience, you know. And if you're new to the audience, this is what I have them do while I'm sharing, because I need you to, if there is such a thing, because the debate is out there whether or not there is such a thing as multitasking, but I am going to ask you to do more than one thing at one time. I'm going to ask you to listen to the information that I'm sharing and get onto all your social media sites and let someone know that Dr. Blackburn is on the air with me, and we have about somewhere between 40 minutes or more so to go, or whatever time Dr. Blackburn needs to bail out between now and 9 o'clock. So let someone know that she is on the air with me. I'm going to share this information with you, and you do what I asked you to do in terms of doing some promotion, because these are interviews and messages that we all need to hear, particularly, and not just if you are, but particularly if you are an educator.
Paper? Stuck on a difficult writing assignment? Have no fear, the WPU Writing Center is here. The Writing Center can help you form a thesis, edit a paper, or just organize ideas. Feel free to stop by either of our locations. We're at Atrium 128 and Valley Road 3048. For more information, please check out our website at wpunj.edu/Writing Center. Remember, walk-ins are welcome. We look forward to seeing you at the Writing Center.
The cow says,
I love you.
To a child, it's just something else to play with. Lock it up, because 1.7 million children in the U.S. are living with unlocked and loaded guns. Get involved at ceasefireusa.org. UP 88.
You're listening to The Reading Circle with Marc Medley on Brave New Radio.
Yes, indeed you are. We're in an extended... My guest is Dr. Barbara Blackburn, and we're talking about rigor in the classroom. So, again, let's talk a little bit about what rigor is not, because I know you have a definition in your book. Actually, I have that posted on one of my electric signboards in the school, the definition of how you define rigor, of what it is and what it is not. It's not a four-letter word. I know that's the title of one of your books.
Well, you're right. And you'll have to take a picture of your signboard and tweet it to me or email it to me so I can send it out. When I talk about what rigor is, there are four parts. There's an environment that supports rigor. There are high expectations, which we've already talked about. There's support, which we've talked about. And then there's student demonstration of learning, because if they don't demonstrate learning, then what use is all the other?
Correct.
Now, when you focus in on that, that means there's a lot of things it's not. So, again, we've talked about it. It's not more. It's not coverage. It's not just for honor students. One of my books is Rigor for Students with Special Needs.
Correct.
Those myths that's out there. Rigor is not your resources. You don't have to have the perfect book or the perfect computer program to do rigor. I mean, you can be rigorous with nothing but a Sears catalog, although I don't think they make those anymore. And I remember in my first job, in my first job interview, that was, I loved the principal. He was in the mountains of North Carolina, and he was an Italian from New Jersey. And on work days, he would cook for us. And I just remember I loved him. I had his daughter in my class. But his interview question for me was, you walk into your classroom, and there's been a mistake, and the custodian has moved everything out of the classroom except the desks and a Sears catalog. Tell me how you're going to teach all day. And so that's why I laugh and say that you can teach with anything. You can teach just with yourself and the students.
Right.
And I think sometimes we think, oh, well, we have to buy this program, or we have to spend money on this. And certainly resources help. Don't hear me say they don't. But I do think we fall into some traps. And certainly, and I've worked for a couple of publishers, so, I saw it inside. A lot of the companies that sell things, they'll slap the word Rigor on there, and it may or may not be Rigor.
That's correct.
And so, it's the same way with Common Core. You saw all of these things that came out that said they were for the Common Core. And, I would buy books that said they were for the Common Core, and I would read them and go, okay, this is not Common Core.
Right.
This is not hitting at the core of what that should be. And so I think we have to be careful when we assume that it's just about the resources. So it really is about what we do with our expectations and support so that students can show you they understand it. And anything else is peripheral to that. So standards are important because they reflect our high expectations. But standards are not enough without the support. And higher level questions. We know to ask higher level questions. Again, it's okay to ask lower level questions as long as they build at the higher level questions. But here's the other thing. You walk into a classroom and your teachers are asking higher order questions and you check it off. Well, guess what? If the student gives a low level response to that and the teacher accepts it, that's not Rigor.
I'm glad you brought that up.
I don't care if they ask a higher order question, if the students don't answer appropriately.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's a piece of the puzzle as well. And that's another thing as we walk through that we look for to see, well, how did the student respond? And you're right. In terms of, okay, you can ask all the higher order thinking questions you want, but if the student is still giving you a lower level answer, we still haven't achieved our objective.
Right. And, you talked earlier, you mentioned Bloom's taxonomy. And, certainly what we use for the most part is Bloom's to think about, what is high level versus low level. But I certainly write about some other models in my book. And I do that partly because I think there are some limitations to Bloom's. And the biggest challenge is that for most teachers, what we pay attention to in Bloom's is the verbs.
Right.
And so it's very verb dependent. So let's take a verb like create. On Bloom's taxonomy, that is a very high level task to create something. Well, I was doing walkthroughs with a principal, and we got to one classroom, and she told me, she said, oh, this teacher is so excited you're coming in. The teacher says that they've got a very rigorous lesson plan, so let's go in and see what they're doing. Well, we went in, and the students were creating. They were creating get well cards for a sick classmate.
Right.
Well, that's not high level.
Right.
And so verbs can be deceptive. And so I probably give 6 or 7 tools in the toolkit, but the one that really I use when I'm working with teachers is Webb's depth of knowledge. And certainly the Common Core is partly based on that, so it's integrated in.
Right.
But it's been around for a good number of years. But what I like about Webb's is in his 4 levels, he focuses on depth and complexity. So it's not just the verb. It's not just what you ask students to do, but it's what they're doing in terms of depth and complexity. Now, a caution I would give you is that if you Google Webb's depth of knowledge, this very nice circle diagram comes up that's divided into 4 parts, and it has verbs for Webb's depth of knowledge. When I was writing this book, I contacted Dr. Webb to see about putting it in the book. Within an hour, Mark, I got a response from his grad assistant, and then I heard from Dr. Webb the next day saying, Dr. Webb did not create this. He does not endorse it. It does not reflect his work. It's the same problem as Bloom's. Then you get down to the verbs. So what you really need to do is look at his definitions and see what they really mean, because it's things like level 1 is basic recall, and it's simple questions,
right?
And it's retelling things, but it also is something that only takes one step to accomplish. As you move to level 2, then what you're doing is looking at the skills and concepts. So you're comparing and contrasting. You're making inferences. It takes more than one step. And levels 1 and 2 are important. You have to do those to get to levels 3 and 4. But levels 1 and 2 are not considered rigorous. So you really want to get to level 3 for rigor, which is the strategic thinking. And these are things like the high levels of analysis, moving beyond application and inference to truly thinking at a higher level. It's things that have multiple possible responses. It's understanding the text, whether that's a story or a picture or a problem in math, moving beyond the text so you demonstrate you understand the text, but you also go beyond the text.
Right.
It's providing evidence and justification. And those kinds of things are where you want rigor. And I just had, yesterday I was down in Charleston, South Carolina, working with a group doing a train-the-trainer model, and one of them said, well, can kindergarten students do those higher levels? And I said, absolutely. With a kindergarten student, they give you an answer and you say why.
Right.
And they give you a half answer and you say why again.
Right.
And that's pushing for justification. That looks different than an 11th grader who you're pushing for with justification, but you're still doing the same thing. So I find that Webb's depth of knowledge is extremely, extremely important. But again, the challenge is don't go for that verb wheel. A lot of what's out there on the internet is not as in-depth as his definitions. And actually, anybody can get to me through my website. They can send me emails. And, you know, if you're struggling with finding it, email me through my website, and I'll send you a link. But I think it's really important, and you've seen in my book, it breaks it down.
Right, that's correct.
It's really important to look at those levels, because most teachers, and again, this happened yesterday, it's very typical, it happens in most workshops I do, they think, for example, if a student, let's say a student reads a story, and the assignment is for them to write a new ending to the story, they think that's rigorous. Well, it's more rigorous than some other things, but here's the thing. They're still basically taking what's in the story and applying it.
Correct.
That's level 2. That's not level 3. So level 3 would be more like take the story, rewrite it from a different perspective, and write your justification for why the perspective was different. So that's going to be more of a level 3. And so that's an entirely different leap than just write a new ending to the story. So a lot of times what we think is rigorous isn't.
Correct. And there... But Mr. Medley, that was rigorous. And then whenever you break it down like you just did, then it fosters other discussion. But it's interesting you brought up the point a couple of minutes ago about resources. Because in 2015, we have more resources. I mean, I cannot think of a better time to be a teacher or a student from a resource perspective. And other day I was sharing with a teacher, he was teaching essay, and the children were having a hard time defining for me what an essay is. Whenever I went into the classroom, I asked the child, well, what do you learn about? They said, writing an essay. I said, what's an essay? Community. Okay, you're writing an essay about your community, but the essay itself is not community. Okay, what's an essay to the next child? It's a test. Like, no, an essay is not a test. So, I mean, it was like I was getting all these crazy cornball answers. So whenever I got the teacher into the office, I said, did you ever define what an essay is? Because I noticed you were going through the diagrams and the, 3-column this and this and that, but did you ever define for them what it is? And he says, no. I said, well, okay. I was at my desk and I went to the computer and just put in Google sample essays, third grade sample essays, and so many things popped up in terms of sample, the definition of essays, so forth. He said, I never thought, and these are teachers that have smart boards, that have projectors on the screens. He said, I could have. So from a with the Sears Roebuck book and You and the Kid, we have so many resources now, and yet we still have folks that don't think to maximize them.
Yeah, and again, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is I think that teachers are very overwhelmed.
I agree.
I think with everything they're expected to do, just having time to pause and reflect on what would work best sometimes is a real challenge. And frankly, I think sometimes they're so tired.
And, hey, we're trying to make the sale, so we're going to make this product look as if it can, do wonders. Talk about learning by osmosis. But, and really all of them can't, but yet we keep buying them and keep putting them on the teachers. And so I could not agree with you more.
And the reality, Mark, the reality is there is no magic bullet.
Correct.
There is no magic potion. If there was, we would all be using it. What it boils down to is if there's a magic bullet, it's that it's good teaching.
Right.
It's a good teacher with students doing their best. And I believe we have lots of good teachers out there.
Correct.
I meet just hundreds of really good teachers, but they could all be better if they had a little bit more time, a little bit more support in terms of working together.
Correct.
And really be able to plan. If I was in charge of the world, okay, if I was in charge of the world and had a magic wand, I would give every Friday to teachers as a planning day, so that they would teach Monday through Thursday, and Friday would be an entire day where they could plan with other teachers, they could work on their plan. Can you imagine if teachers actually had a full day to plan for each week what they could do?
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. But see,
I'm
again,
not in charge of the world. Yeah,
but and if I have with education in general, is that that type of thinking makes some sense in a 2015, but we have gone through various ages. We've gone through agricultural, industrial, technological, so forth and so on and so on. But we're still doing business like back in the agricultural age. All of our scheduling is still built around farming. It's still the summers off, the 8 to 3, the so forth and so on. That has not changed since school began. We're still working under the old factory bell system. And so changing across the board, education across the board, and with ideas such as the one that you just gave, really would help us to be able to improve in a 2015.
Right. And it's just amazing. Teachers are always like, oh my gosh. Because they can't even imagine having that kind of planning time. But, there's all these comparisons internationally. But one of the things, when you really look at some of the other countries, particularly those that rank very high, their teachers have more time to work together and to plan. It's not necessarily a day like what I described.
Right.
But they do get more regular time to work with other teachers, during the week. And I do think that's a problem we have. And it's a resource challenge, but I think that's one of the things, if we're going to look at improving education, we've got to figure out how teachers can have more time to truly reflect and plan their teaching, because nothing works, whether it's rigor or differentiation or anything else, nothing works if it's not planned. You can't just do it off the cuff. I've been presenting on rigor for 15 years. Off the cuff. I do it more off the cuff than I used to, but I still plan. I still have a plan every time I go in the door. And if I don't take the time to plan and to adjust, then I'm doing a disservice to my students who happen to be teachers and principals.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. We're going to share some more information with the listening audience. Don't you dare move. Get on all your social media sites and let them know that we have about 20 minutes left. And hopefully no one unfortunately missed the first hour and 10 minutes that they've been with us. Actually, I hope you've been with me since 6, because it has been an educational morning. I dubbed it as Educational Saturday, and it is living up to its dubbing. It is living up to its name. It is Education Saturday. We talked about poverty in the first hour and a half, and we're talking rigor in the second hour and a half. So don't you dare move. Stay right there as I share this information with you.
How can I make money in the music business? Why copyright?
Should I make a CD anymore?
Trying to break into the music and entertainment biz? Wondering how the business works? Wondering how guys like Elton John and MC Hammer go bankrupt?
Why am I not making any cash?
Tune in to WP Brave New Radio every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Hang with the university's music business faculty hosts, me, Steve Marconi.
And me, Dave Phil. Plus, we'll have industry guests and students from the music management program.
How do I get gigs down at the shore?
Call in with your questions and hear the latest in industry happenings.
How do I get my music on iTunes?
How do I get on a tour?
It's Music Biz 101 and more every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Only on WP Brave New Radio.
Your secretary's got our checks, right?
Mine's direct deposit, I think.
Hey, it's me, DJ Hyun,
the host of Groove With Me. Every week, I will play you a tasty playlist focusing on a genre or theme. Groove With Me, every Sunday at 1 o'clock, right here on Brave New Radio.
Want to expand your horizons? Want to broaden your mind? Well, listen to the only show of its kind. Listen to The Reading Circle.
We bring you what's going on in the world of reading, in the world of books. Sometimes the book may be from 20, 30 years ago, because the thing about books, they are timeless, particularly if there's a good message. And then there are times when we do books that are hot off the press, that were just released.
Listen to The Reading Circle every Saturday morning from 6 a.m.
The Reading Circle with your host, Marc Medley.
Only on WP 88.7 FM.
You're listening to The Reading Circle with Marc Medley on Brave New Radio.
Yes, indeed you are, and you've been listening to The Reading Circle since 6 o'clock this morning. We've had almost 3 hours of The Reading Circle, and it has been a power-packed 3 hours indeed. So, Barbara, as we now work our way near the end, and in most of our states, all of us have these high-stakes testing, these high-stakes assessments. I mean, to the point now where, as a student, all they're really being is tested. I mean, we have, in our district, we have benchmark testing, the unit testing, we have the online testing of a program that we bought. Then, of course, we have now what used to be New Jersey Ask is now PARC, which I believe, many of the states has adopted. How do we now, because I don't know if it was you or somebody I was talking to at one point, we were talking about, seemed like we're moving away from love of learning to fear of learning. And the same thing with teaching. We're kind of moving away from love of teaching to almost fear of teaching. Someone texted me yesterday and said, you know what, my passion for education is leaving, and it's not because of the kids, it's not because of the parents, it's not because of it, other than this constant pressure with testing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's a huge challenge in schools today, too. I'd probably put it a second, right after the not having time to work with everybody else. I think in the public's zeal to want proof that kids were learning, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't have a problem with accountability.
Right, I don't either.
But I think in the zeal for that, there were some unintended consequences. And the sheer amount of testing and the pressure it puts on students and teachers, I don't think anybody anticipated that. I mean, I think that's partly why with the rewrite of No Child Left Behind that has just passed the House and the Senate, right, it includes a decrease of testing. I believe that's part of the pushback. When I was teaching in North Carolina years ago, more years than I would like to count, I taught in a system of standardized testing for promotion. North Carolina decided to use the California Achievement Test, which tells you how long ago it was, for promotion. And this was long before No Child Left Behind.
Right.
They actually followed Texas, which was already using standardized testing for promotion. And I was teaching, at that point in time, I was teaching 8th graders, which was a benchmark year. So they couldn't be promoted if they didn't score the cutoff. Now, I was also teaching in a track system where we had advanced, regular, and what we call developmental. And I was teaching developmental students, which meant they were below the cutoff to start with. So they're below the cutoff. They've got to score the cutoff to be promoted to 9th grade. And it was the same year they renormed the test. So even if kids held their own, their scores were going to go down. And there was a lot of pressure with that. And I was still young enough and naive enough, I just explained it to the kids.
Right.
Said, well, here's the deal. And I remember one of them said, well, can't you call the governor and get him to delay this for like a year? And I just laughed because I thought they clearly think I have more power than I have. And, you know, so we have to deal with this. And our principal, who I loved dearly, had bought all of us this resource kit, and it was these 3 huge notebooks of test prep that you were supposed to do every day. Well, you know, it was awful. It really was. And what I remember thinking was, if I do this all the time, I'm going to turn my kids off, and I'm doing
That's right.
motivated. And so what I told the kids, I showed them the notebooks, and it scared them. And I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to teach you the standards, and I'm going to do the absolute best I can, and you're going to need to do your absolute best. And we're going to do some of these notebooks because it's not fair for me to never do multiple choice, and then all of a sudden you have to take multiple choice on a test.
Right.
So I'm going to make sure you're prepared for the test. Well, so I taught that year, and I did that. I did my best with the standards, and I taught probably a third of what was in those notebooks. I used about a third of it because they were standard test-taking practice.
Correct.
In the principal's office, and as I was walking up to his office, I thought, oh my gosh, I so know what has happened. The test scores have come back. I only did a third of those notebooks. My kids have failed, and I'm in such trouble. So I got up to the office, and Mr. Wilson was in there, and he had hired me. He was a new principal the year he hired me, and this is like my 3rd year, so I'm up for tenure too. And we sat down, and he said, you know, Miss Blackburn, do you know why I called you in? And I said, no, but now before you say anything, I want you to know that I love my job, and I love working for you. And, you know, he's a very serious man.
Right.
He says, well, that's fine, but, you know, we really need to talk about, and I stopped him, and I said, you know, Mr. Wilson, before we go any further, I don't know if you know this, but you know you gave me these developmental students because nobody else wanted them, and I love teaching them. And I don't know if you know this, but when we had the North Carolina history contest from the state this year, my students took 3rd place after the 2 advanced classes. So I want you to know we're really doing some good things. And he said, well, that's all good, but we really need to talk about your test scores. And, you know, I said, well, you know, Mr. Wilson, and I pulled out my ace in the hole. I said, I really do love working with you and working with these kids. You know, if you need me to, I'll coach cheerleading next year. And, you know, he's just like, no. But, I mean, you know, I wanted to keep doing what I was doing, and I was really worried. And he said, no, really need to talk about your test scores. I want you to tell me what you did.
Right.
So I confessed the whole thing. You know, I confessed that I'd focused on the standards and that I'd only done a third of the test prep. And I'm like, okay, I'm fired. Okay, you like what I did. No, I just wondered. You know, because the other teacher, out of her 22, all but 5 have to take the test. And out of your 44, all but 5 pass the test. So whatever you did worked. I just wanted to know what it was.
What it was.
Now, I think even though the pressure is more now, I still think the same principle applies. We have to do our very best to teach the standards.
Correct.
That's what the test tests. And we have to do enough preparation for the test so that students aren't surprised when they get there. They need to be prepared for the length of the items. They need to be prepared for the type of the items.
Correct.
Certainly key vocabulary you can teach.
Correct.
But at some point as a teacher, you have to say, all right, I know testing's important and I'm going to pay attention to it, but I'm not going to obsess over it. And it's a choice you make. And I think it's really hard. In fact, in my newest book, I just revised classroom instruction from A to Z, and I have a whole chapter on this because it's such a pressure piece for teachers. Now, I also think that leaders need to do their part to try to say, yes, test scores are important, but remember, we're also here for the kids. And leaders won't. You can't really boil problem solving down to multiple choice tests.
Right.
And so you've got to really keep that broader focus. And I do understand, for every teacher that's listening to me, I do understand the pressure. And I do understand that now test scores are being used to evaluate you.
Correct.
And they're the way they're used. If you want to use it for a small portion, I can live with that. But this notion that it's half your evaluation, I'm not a fan of.
Same here.
I think that's how tests were designed to be used. And I would say pay attention to what the test is telling you, because sometimes it can tell you about the kids. Sometimes it can tell you about you. I know that for me, one thing was I found certain standards that I wasn't teaching as well as I thought I was. So using that data helped me be a better teacher the next year.
Well,
but I encourage teachers to say you are in a stressful situation, and you do things that nobody else would be willing to do. You take a chance that you're willing to come in and risk everything to make a difference with other people's children. And you are doing a good job. And please, to the extent that you can, don't beat up on yourself. You got enough other people beating up on you.
Absolutely.
Chances are all those students who grow into apple trees, they're not going to come back and tell you about it.
That's right.
But you've got to know and trust that if you're doing your best, that's going to have to be good enough.
Absolutely. And it was interesting the way you put that in terms of teaching the standards versus teaching the test, because many times we get hit with, well, all you teachers now do is teach to the test. But there's a difference between teaching the standards and teaching the test. And I'm glad you made that differentiation. And also, I'm glad to hear you say, teachers, please stop beating up on yourselves. Because, again, as I shared with Dr. Payne, I close all of my staff meetings with teachers make every other profession possible. There is no profession, I don't care if he's president, I don't care if he's astrophysicist, astronaut, scientist, I don't care what your profession is, somewhere along the way you had a teacher. So teachers make every other profession possible.
And he greets his teachers every morning with this statement. He says, on your worst day, you are someone's best hope. Now, but I don't totally agree with it.
All right.
I think on your worst day, on the day where your kids got up late and breakfast burned, and your shirt got a stain on it, and you came in and the copier wasn't working, I don't know that we are somebody's best hope. You got to wait for the kicker. On that worst day, on the day that nothing went right, you're not somebody's best hope. You're probably, for one of your kids, their only hope.
Correct.
And I think we really need to remember the positive power we have, even in the midst of all the negativity.
Absolutely. We're down to the last couple of minutes of the interview. This is the opportunity for you to promote. You can say anything with the exception of a dollar amount, but in terms of your workshops, your conferences, your books, your websites, this is your opportunity to share that with the listening audience of how they can get in touch with you. And before we even do that, I thank you so much for the rescheduling. I know the last time we had the technical difficulties and you were happy and willing enough to do a rescheduled date, and I'm so glad as it worked out it was this morning. But again, I thank you for rising early, and this is your opportunity to promote.
Well, that's great, and I do appreciate you having me on the show. Well, folks can get in touch with me through my website. It's barbarablackburnonline.com, or you can Google me, put in Barbara Blackburn and Rigor. And I would tell you the website is your first and best resource. There are over 100 free resources on there, articles, videos, activity templates to use with kids, podcasts I've done, all kinds of things. And you have copyright permission to use all of them, and you don't have to register. So that's where to go. It's BarbaraBlackburnOnline.com. You can also contact me through that. There's information on all of my books. I have 15 books, 6 on Rigor. One of my new ones from last year was Motivating Struggling Learners, 10 Strategies to Build Student Success. So there's information on all of those, and it links you over to my publisher, or you can find them on Amazon. I also do workshops all the time with schools and districts, and so if you're interested in that, I do them on site. I do them via Skype or webinars, so lots of different options. So you can contact me through my website on any of that. And certainly, I'd also love to hear from you if you just got any feedback on today's interview.
All right. Well, my DJ that follows me, he's in the wings. Barry's there in the lobby, so we're going to transition over. But again, Barbara, I cannot thank you enough. This last hour and a half has been inspirational, educational, informational, and inspirational for me. And I hope it has been the same for those in the listening audience. And I hope the entire morning has been that, particularly for our educators in the audience. And you have 2 contacts that you can get in contact with. They're willing to come to your school. Barbara's willing to come out, as she said, in various methods, whether it's Skype or whether it's in person. Do contact her. There are a lot of free, F-R-E-E, that's the $1 amount we can say on the air. There are a lot of free resources on her site. Do go there. That's BarbaraBlackburn.com, correct?
Well, and, for all your listeners, thank you again for your time, and I just hope you have a blessed holiday season.
Thank you, and same to you. Take care now.
Bye.
Well, that ends a doubleheader of the Reading Circle, and it came through just as I envisioned it. I allotted an hour and a half for each guest. Dr. Payne was with me from 6 to 7:30, and Dr. Blackburn was with me from 7:30 to 9.